the hearing my brother filed to overturn our mother's will, his lawyer stood before the judge and said, "The deceased was frail, isolated, and entirely dependent on her daughter, who used that dependence to manipulate a dying woman into cutting out her own son. This will is the product of undue influence." My brother sat there in his good suit, the picture of a wronged child, and my lawyer stood up and said, "Your Honor, the deceased anticipated this exact claim." She left a video, recorded with her attorney present, addressing it directly. "We'd like to play it for the court." My brother's composed face came apart one muscle at a time. "Let me back up, because to understand why our mother recorded a video defending a will she hadn't died with yet, you have to understand the 4 years I spent watching her fade, and the 4 years my brother spent absent, and the specific unique cruelty of being told that the love you poured out was actually manipulation. My name is Beatriz Alvarez. I'm 43 years old. And I spent the last 4 years of my mother's life as her full-time caregiver, and when she died and left me the larger share of her modest estate, a recognition in her words of the years I'd given her, my brother, who had visited her a handful of times in those 4 years, contested the will, and told our entire extended family that I had manipulated a dying woman. This is the story of that accusation, what it did to me, and the recording my mother left behind because she knew her son better than he ever knew her. Let me tell you about the 4 years first, because they are the foundation of everything, and because my brother's whole case depended on erasing them. My mother, Rosa, was diagnosed with a progressive illness when she was 71, the kind that takes you slowly, over years, stealing your independence a piece at a time before it takes your life. And when the diagnosis came, our family faced the question every family faces: who would care for her? There were 2 of us, me and my older brother, Tamaz. Tamaz was the successful one, the important one, the son with the big career and the big life in another city. And it was understood, in the silent way families understand these things, that Tamaz was too busy, too important, too far away to be involved in the daily work of our mother's decline. And that I, with a more modest life and a flexibility Tamaz didn't have, would be the one to step in. So I stepped in. And I want to describe what stepping in actually meant, because my brother's lawsuit would later reduce 4 years of it to a single sinister word: dependence. And I need you to understand what that word actually contained. It meant I moved back into my mother's home. It meant I gave up a relationship, a career trajectory, years of my own life, to become the person who managed her illness. It meant learning to administer her medications, to manage her symptoms, to navigate a healthcare system designed to exhaust you. It meant the physical labor of caring for a body that could do less and less for itself. The bathing, the feeding, the lifting, the 1,000 undignified intimate tasks that dying actually requires, and that no one talks about. It meant the night shifts, waking every few hours, the years of interrupted sleep. It meant watching my sharp, funny, fierce mother lose her words, her memories, her ability to recognize the world, and holding her through the terror of that loss. It meant grief that started years before she died and never stopped, the long grief of losing someone slowly while they're still alive to be lost. That's what dependence meant. My mother depended on me because I was there, every day for 4 years, doing the work of keeping her alive and comfortable and loved. And Tamaz was not there. Let me be precise about Tamaz's involvement, because precision matters, and because he would later try to blur it. In 4 years, Tamaz visited our mother a handful of times. I counted later from my records. 7 visits, most of them brief, most of them timed around holidays or his own convenience. He called occasionally when he remembered. He contributed some money, sporadically, which he would later present as though it were the equivalent of my 4 years of labor. And he stayed away in his important life, while I dissolved my own life into the work of our mother's care. I didn't resent it at the time. That's the truth. I was too busy, too tired, too consumed by the actual work to keep a grievance letter. And I loved my mother, and caring for her, though it cost me everything, was also the deepest thing I've ever done, a privilege inside the exhaustion. I didn't do it for the will. I want that on the record, because Tamaz would later claim I did. I did it because she was my mother, and she was dying, and someone had to. And that someone was me, because it was always going to be me, because Tamaz had a life too important to interrupt. Let me tell you about the subplot that would become crucial, though I didn't know it at the time. The hospice nurse, a woman named Grace. My mother's final year, when her care exceeded what I could manage alone, we had hospice support, and the primary nurse was a woman named Grace who came several times a week. And Grace, over that year, saw everything. She saw me, the daily reality of my caregiving, the exhaustion, the devotion. And she saw my brother's absence. In a year of regular visits, Grace encountered Tamaz exactly once, briefly. Nurses noticed these things. Grace noticed. And Grace, though I didn't know it would matter, was the kind of professional who kept careful records, not just mental notes, but the observational documentation that good hospice nurses keep about a patient's environment, support system, and state of mind. Grace also saw something else, something that would turn out to matter enormously. She saw my mother's mind. Because one of Tamaz's central claims would be that our mother was too diminished, too frail, too cognitively compromised to make a sound decision about her will, that I'd manipulated a woman who wasn't all there. And Grace, the professional who saw my mother regularly in that final year, knew the truth. That my mother, though physically failing, had periods of complete lucidity, that she was cognitively present and capable of clear decisions, that the woman Tamaz would describe as a manipulable husk was in her clear moments entirely herself. Now let me tell you about my mother's foresight, the second subplot, the thing that saved me, because my mother, even fading, even dying, saw something coming that I was too deep in the daily work to anticipate. About a year before she died, in one of her lucid stretches, my mother did something without telling me. She asked to be taken to see a lawyer, her own lawyer, whom she'd used for years. and she was quite insistent about going alone, or rather, with a caregiver but without me in the room. I thought it was about updating some documents, routine end-of-life paperwork, and I didn't pry, because it was her business and she wanted her privacy. What she was actually doing, I would only learn after her death, was two things. First, she was finalizing her will, the will that left me the larger share of her estate. In recognition, the document said, of the years of care my daughter Beatrice gave me, at the cost of her own life, which her brother did not give. She wrote that. In the will, a specific acknowledgement of the disparity in our involvement. And second, because my mother knew her son, she recorded a video. With her lawyer present, on the same day she finalized the will, in a state of documented lucidity, she recorded a statement addressing, directly and in advance, the exact accusation she knew Tamaz would make. She had me taken out of the equation entirely. I wasn't there, didn't know it existed, had no hand in it, precisely so that no one could ever claim I'd influenced it. My mother knew Tamaz would contest the will. She knew he would claim she'd been manipulated, that she wasn't of sound mind, that I'd coerced a dying woman. She knew because she knew her son, knew his pride, his absence, his sense of entitlement, his inability to accept that his 4 years of absence might have consequences. And she reached forward from within her own dying to defend the daughter who'd cared for her against the son who hadn't. Let me tell you what happened when she died, and how the accusation came. My mother died peacefully, at home, with me holding her hand, as she'd wanted. And after the funeral came the will, and the will left me the larger share, with that written acknowledgement of my years of care. It was not a vast estate, a modest house, some savings, nothing that would make anyone rich. But it was more than half to me, and a smaller share to Tamaz, and my mother's stated reason was the disparity in our care for her. And Tamaz detonated. He announced, appalled, wounded, betrayed. He told the extended family that our mother would never have cut him out like this, that it was unthinkable, that the only explanation was that I, who had been alone with her for 4 years, had manipulated her, poisoned her against him. Coerced a frail and dying woman into rewriting her will in my favor. He cast my 4 years of caregiving as 4 years of sinister influence. Every day I'd spent caring for her became, in his telling, a day I'd spent isolating her from her family and turning her against her son. He filed to contest the will on grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity, the legal terms for she was manipulated, and she wasn't of sound mind. And here's the wound, the specific and terrible wound of this particular betrayal. He took the best thing I had ever done, the 4 years of love and labor and sacrifice I'd given our dying mother, and he recast it as the worst thing. He looked at the daughter who'd bathed and fed and held their mother through 4 years of decline, and he called her a manipulator who'd exploited a dying woman for money. There's no accusation that could have hurt more, because it desecrated the one thing that had been pure. My caregiving was the deepest, most selfless thing I'd ever done, and my brother turned it into a crime. Let me tell you about the midpoint, the moment the accusation nearly won, because it nearly did. Because here is the awful thing, Tamaz's accusation was plausible. Not true, but plausible, and plausibility is what these things run on. I had been alone with our mother for 4 years. I had received the larger share. An outside eye to the extended family, who hadn't been in the house. The setup looked exactly like what undue influence looks like. An isolated elderly woman, a single caregiver with total access, a will that favored that caregiver. Tamaz didn't have to prove I'd manipulated her. He just had to make it look possible, and the circumstances made it look possible, and the family, who loved a dramatic story and didn't want to take sides against the important son, began to waver. And they wavered toward Tamaz. That was the midpoint despair. Relatives who'd known me my whole life, who knew I'd cared for our mother, began to look at me differently, began to entertain the possibility that maybe, alone in that house for 4 years, I'd done something to influence her. My reputation, my integrity. The very meaning of my 4 years of sacrifice hung in the balance, and the balance was tipping toward the brother who'd been absent, because he was confident and wounded and important, and I was exhausted and grieving and alone exactly as I'd been for 4 years. Let me tell you about the specific night the family's doubt became unbearable, because it's the night I nearly surrendered. It was at a cousin's house, a gathering that was supposed to be neutral, and my Aunt Lucinda, my mother's sister, a woman I'd known and loved my whole life, took me aside into the kitchen. And Lucinda, who I'd expected to be my defender, looked at me with something I'd never seen from her before, suspicion, softened by pity. And she said, "Beatrice, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. You were alone with your mother for 4 years, and she cut Tamaz down to almost nothing. Did you ever say anything to her about him, about how he wasn't there? Did you ever, even without meaning to, turn her against him?" I stared at her. Tia. I bathed her, I fed her, I held her while she forgot my name. I didn't have time to poison her against anyone, I was too busy keeping her alive. I know, Lucinda said, but she didn't quite meet my eyes. It's just Tamaz is so certain, and it does look, you have to admit how it looks. A woman alone with her mother for years, and then she gets the bigger share. Even if you didn't mean to, Beatrice, even if it was innocent, maybe she felt she owed you, and that's a kind of pressure, isn't it? Maybe you didn't manipulate her on purpose, but, and there it was. Even my aunt, who knew me, who'd watched me give 4 years, was reframing my sacrifice as suspicious. Even the innocent version she was offering me, the maybe you didn't mean to, was an accusation. There was no version of 4 years of caregiving that Tamaz's narrative couldn't poison. If I'd been distant, I'd have been cold. Because I'd been devoted, I was manipulative. My love itself had become the evidence against me. I drove home from that kitchen and I sat in my car and I cried the way I hadn't cried since the funeral. Because I understood, finally, the full cruelty of what Tamaz had done. He hadn't just accused me. He'd made my devotion inadmissible. He built a story in which the more I'd loved and cared for our mother, the more suspicious I became, a story in which my 4 years weren't my defense but my indictment. And it was working. My own aunt was standing in a kitchen, suggesting that the deepest thing I'd ever done might have been a subtle crime. That was the night I nearly gave up, nearly offered to just split the estate evenly to make it stop, to end the accusation, to stop being looked at as a manipulator by my own family. Because the money had never mattered to me, I'd have given all of it back to have my mother alive, or even just to make the accusation stop. I actually drafted the message to Tamaz's lawyer in my head. I'll split it evenly, just make this end. What stopped me was not greed. It was that surrendering would have ratified the lie. If I split the estate to end the fight, I would be tacitly admitting that maybe Tamaz had a point, that maybe my 4 years were suspect, that maybe I had done something wrong. Lucinda's, even if you didn't mean to, would become the family's permanent truth. That Beatrice probably manipulated her mother, but they'd all decide to be gracious about it. And I had not done anything wrong. I had loved and cared for my dying mother, and I would not sign a document that let my brother recast that love as a crime and let my family file it away as a kindly overlooked sin. My mother's written words, her stated reasons, deserved to stand. And I owed it to the 4 years, to every night shift, every bath, every hour I'd held her through her terror, to fight. I deleted the message I hadn't sent. I would not buy peace with my own good name. And then I found the video. It was my mother's lawyer who told me. In the process of defending against Tamaz's contest, I met with the lawyer who drafted the will, and he said, "There's something your mother left." She recorded a statement with me present the day she finalized the will. She was very clear about why. She said, and I'm quoting my notes, "My son Tamaz will say his sister manipulated me. I want to answer him myself so Beatrice doesn't have to." She anticipated all of this. Would you like to see it? And I watched my mother, lucid and clear and entirely herself, recorded a year before her death, defend me from beyond her own grave. Here is how it ended. The case went to a hearing, because Tamaz would not back down. His pride was fully committed now, and backing down would mean admitting he'd falsely accused his caregiving sister. And at the hearing, his lawyer made the case I've described. The frail, isolated woman, the manipulative daughter, the will that was the product of undue influence. And then my lawyer stood up and said, "Your Honor, the deceased anticipated this exact claim." She left a video, recorded with her attorney present, addressing it directly. And we played it. And the courtroom watched my mother clearly lucid, clearly herself, her lawyer visibly present beside her, the date documented say in her own words. "My name is Rosa Alvarez, and I am recording this because I know my son. I am of sound mind today, as my lawyer will attest, and as anyone who speaks with me can see. I am leaving the larger share of my estate to my daughter Beatrice, and I am doing it freely, of my own decision, and I want to explain why, so that no one can claim otherwise after I'm gone. For 4 years, my daughter has cared for me. She gave up her own life to do it. She has bathed me and fed me and held me through the worst of this illness and stayed awake through the nights and lost years of her own life to keeping me alive and comfortable and loved. She did this while my son, Tamaz, stayed away. I love my son, but in 4 years, he has visited me a handful of times and left the care of his dying mother entirely to his sister. That is the truth, and everyone in this family knows it, even if they will pretend not to. I am leaving Beatrice more because she gave me more. That is not manipulation. That is justice. She did not ask for this. She doesn't even know I'm recording it. This is my decision, made freely, by a woman in her right mind, who watched one child show up and one child stay away, and who chose to recognize the one who showed up. Tamaz, if you are watching this, it means you have done exactly what I feared and contested my will and accused your sister of manipulating me. So let me speak to you directly one last time. She did not manipulate me. You abandoned me. And I am not punishing you. The share I left you is fair for a son who was absent. I am recognizing her for being present. If you cannot accept that, that is your failing, not hers and not mine. I made this choice with a clear mind and a full heart, and no court and no lawyer and no amount of your wounded pride can make it anything other than what it is. A mother's last act of gratitude to the daughter who did not leave. The courtroom was silent. And then Grace, the hospice nurse, testified to my mother's lucidity in her final year, to the reality of my caregiving, to Tamaz's near total absence, all of it documented in her professional records. And the picture Tamaz had painted, the manipulated husk, the sinister isolating daughter, collapsed entirely against a lucid mother's own recorded voice and a professional witness's records. The will stood, completely. The judge found no undue influence and no lack of capacity. How could she against that video? And Tamaz's contest was dismissed. My mother's last wishes and her last act of gratitude were honored exactly as she'd made them, defended by her own foresight against the son who tried to overturn them. But the vindication that mattered was not the estate. It was the video itself, my mother, from beyond death, saying the words that undid the accusation that had desecrated my 4 years. She did not manipulate me. You abandoned me. She recognized me, on the record, in her own voice, in front of the whole family and a court of law. She reached out of her own dying to give me back the truth of what I'd done, that it was love, not manipulation, sacrifice, not scheming, the deepest thing I'd ever done, not a crime. My brother tried to turn my caregiving into my shame. My mother made sure it would be recorded forever as what it was, her daughters showing up. The family reckoning came after. Relatives who'd wavered toward Tamaz, who'd entertained the possibility that I'd manipulated our mother, had to sit with the video, with her own voice, and reckon with the fact that they doubted the daughter who gave 4 years while indulging the son who gave 7 visits. Some apologized, genuinely, ashamed. Others found it easier to go quiet. Tamaz himself never apologized. He experienced the video as a betrayal by our mother, one final rejection, rather than as the consequence of his own absence and his own false accusation. He's estranged from me now, by his choice, and I've made my peace with it, because a brother who could recast my mother's care as manipulation is not a brother I need to fight to keep. Grace, the hospice nurse, I stayed in touch with. She'd seen the truth of those 4 years when almost no one else did, and her testimony, her professional records, her willingness to stand up and describe what she'd witnessed. It mattered enormously, and I'm grateful to her still. She told me something I hold on to. I've seen a lot of families at the end, the ones who show up and the ones who don't, and then the ones who don't show up spend the reading of the will pretending they did. Your mother saw it clearly. Most dying people do, and she made sure the truth would outlast the pretending. It did. For 4 years, I cared for our dying mother while my brother stayed away. When she recognized that care in her will, he tried to recast 4 years of my love as 4 years of my manipulation, to take the best thing I'd ever done and turn it into my shame. He never imagined that our mother, even dying, even fading, saw exactly what he was and exactly what he'd do. She knew her son. She knew he'd contest the will, knew he'd call her manipulated, knew he'd rather believe his sister was a schemer than face his own absence. So she reached forward from within her own death and left the one thing that could defend me, her own voice, clear and certain, saying the truth. She did not manipulate me. You abandoned me. I gave my mother 4 years. And in return, at the very end, with the last foresight of her fading mind, she gave me back the one thing my brother tried to steal, the truth of what those 4 years were. Not manipulation. Love. The deepest love I've ever given, recognized by the only person whose recognition I needed, in a video she recorded so that her daughter would never have to defend her own devotion alone. I never had to. She defended it for me, which was in the end the last and greatest thing she ever taught me. That showing up is never manipulation, that presence is never a crime, and that a mother who watched one child stay and one child go will if she's wise, and if she loves you. Make very sure the record shows exactly who was holding her hand at the end. I was holding her hand. She made sure everyone would know it.